6:42, morning to you. Time to have a look at some of the front pages. To start with the Telegraph, it leads with nationalities of migrants with the highest crime rates could be revealed in league tables. That's being considered by ministers, apparently.
Meanwhile, the Daily Mail leads with voters no longer viewing the Tories as the party of defence. In damning polls that show Labour are the more trusted party.
The Times has thousands of patients at hospitals with long waiting lists being offered treatment in the private sector and elsewhere in the NHS, so they can be seen faster.
And The Guardian leads with schools in England are closing down legitimate debate about the Israel-Gaza war because teachers feel ill-equipped to discuss it.
The Express has Sir Ian Duncan-Smith warning that voting for Reform UK would push Britain back into the grip of the European Union and kill Brexit.
Joining us to go through what's making the news is political editor of the HuffPost, the lovely Kevin Schofield, and assistant editor of The Spectator, the equally lovely Cindy Yu. Thank you both for and happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
Keep forgetting it's Easter weekend. It's lovely.
Oh, don't forget.
No.
Cindy, Telegraph, migrant league tables.
Yeah, not such a happy story, I'm afraid. Basically, what's happened is that Robert Jenrick has led a group of Conservative backbenchers who are very concerned about immigration, legal and illegal, and are basically saying that we should have a database where we link it to their nationality when the criminals are caught. So basically, are they asylum seekers or are they legal migrants and from a certain nationality? So Denmark does this, and actually it finds that over half of the crime... that it finds that some nationalities commit twice as much crime, 8 times as much crimes as Danish nationals, so from people from Kuwait, Tunisia, Lebanon and Somalia. So now, obviously, this is quite a radical suggestion to make this about nationalities, suggesting as if some nationalities are more prone to crime than others. And we were talking about this in the green room, you know, I didn't really know what to think about it, because we do have nationality-based or ethnically based data for healthcare, for education.
Yes, but healthcare is different, isn't it? Because people have different... respond to medication differently and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, but for education too, you know, we know that the BAME label, for example, when it comes to educational attainment, actually hides a lot of, you know, black Caribbeans are actually at the bottom of the pile. Chinese, British are actually at the top of the pile. So looking at that is helpful to understand. And I wondered if this would be akin to that. But actually, you know, overall, what is the point of a league table like this, other than to say, you know, in the future, people from Kuwait, for example, should all be, you know, not allowed to come. And I think that would where it gets into tricky territory.
And Kevin, if you look at the list of nationalities that the Denmark stats reveal, it does appear to play into that sort of like, we don't want people from those countries, the usual suspects.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're sort of tarring everyone from a country with the same brush, and there might be a few who are criminals from, just choose any country at random. Oh, therefore, we're not going to let anyone in from that country because they're a bunch of criminals. I mean, really, can we really extrapolate it to that extent? I think it's also interesting that it's come from Robert Jenrick, who, as we know, is on manoeuvres, wants to be the next Tory leader. So, you know, take what he says, not with a pinch of salt, but look at it in that context, because he's pandering to the right of the party because he thinks that will be beneficial for him after the election, because he wants to be Conservative Party leader.
It is a difficult one, because there will be people who are fed up with what is going on with migration, legal and illegal at the moment.
And this is legal migration as well, isn't it?
And they will just cling on to anything that someone says, well, this could help solve it.
Yeah.
Even though there's no indication it will.
No, exactly. There's no indication.
So it will gain traction.
Yes, and that, I mean, you know, it's the front page of the Telegraph, for God's sake. You know, Kevin's totally right. This is from someone who is posturing for the leadership contest. But the Conservative leadership are in such a dire strait at the moment. Can they really afford just to reject something like this out of hand? Which is why they're saying that they're considering it. And depending on how much momentum this call gets, you know, it might be one of those things that Rishi Sunak feels, just give it to them, pander to the right of the party so that they see off the threat from there. But to be honest, it's all loss minimisation at this point.
It's very political papers today for a Saturday and a bank holiday weekend Saturday as well. Let's go to the Daily Mail, Kevin, shall we? Labour more trusted on defence than the Tories.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's remarkable when you consider when Labour were led by Jeremy Corbyn not so long ago. I mean, they were miles behind on defence, you know, they were not trusted at all on defence. But, and it's not even close. If you look at the numbers, it's 34% of voters trust Labour on defence and only 23% the Tories. I mean, that's a remarkable turnaround in just a very short space of time. But I think it's because the Tories have been in power for such a long time. People notice that they're not coming up with the money for our armed forces, and they're holding them account for it. And also what's very interesting is, alongside the piece in the Daily Mail, there's an article written by James Heapy, who just through the week there resigned as Armed Forces Minister, saying we need to spend 3% of our GDP on defence. At the moment, it's just over 2%. The government says the ambition is to hit 2.5%.
Well, Grant Shapps has called for 3%, the Defence Secretary
Yes.
himself.
Another one who wants to be Tory leader afterwards. You've got to take that into consideration as well. But James Heapy basically says that Grant Shapps was offered by the Treasury a journey to 2.5%, taking 10 years. So
the interesting thing with this, though, is, I mean, look, to be fair, I've just had to Google who the Shadow Defence Secretary was, John Healey.
John Healey, yeah.
Who I couldn't remember, and so I'm guessing most people probably don't know.
Not as true.
And I don't particularly know what Labour's defence plans are.
That's
so is it just a case of Labour's more trusted because they're not the Tories?
Yeah, absolutely. And the Tories have had 2 major wars in the last 2 years, happening in the world. Not their fault, but voters can see that actually when there are these kind of flashpoints, is the UK prepared? And that's very, very concerning. But, Stephen, you're totally right. We don't know how much more Labour's going to be spending. It's unlikely they're going to be finding much more. I mean, in fact, Keir Starmer earlier this week said something that could have come out of a Tory leader's mouth, saying that there's no magic money tree.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
But the Conservatives are just in a position where they're just being kicked for being the incumbent and being the long-lasting incumbent.
But again, this is just why, and if it annoys you at home, but this is why people are saying the Tories stand no chance of winning the next election, because nobody knows what Labour stands for, but that doesn't matter.
But they don't have to say anything, do they?
No, they'll benefit. In the election coming, they benefit from not being the Conservative Party. They've been in power for 14 years. People are just sick of them. They don't think things are working in the country, so they blame who's in power. The problem for Labour will be once they get in, people will be like, right, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the pressure is on them.
Yeah, they might be a one-term wonder. You never know.
So let's stick with we've got the holy grail of vote winners here: migration, defence, and now we come to the NHS, Cindy, which is the front page of the Times.
Yeah, this is a really interesting story. So Victoria Atkins, the Health Secretary, is basically taking a look at the NHS data and finding that actually there are 15 hospital trusts who are responsible for more than half of the patients on a long waiting list. So there are some that are only responsible for 1% of that waiting list. So what's going wrong at these 15 hospital trusts? And she's basically saying, I know who you are, sort it out, and using a supposedly carrot and stick approach, which I think makes sense. The NHS is a gigantic organisation. There will obviously be variation in how it's run. There will be bureaucracy at some, there will be good things to be learning at others. And so disaggregating the trusts does feel like, something that might solve, at least start to solve some of the productivity problems in the NHS.
How much is it going to cost? Is any of this explained?
There doesn't seem to be a price tag on it. I mean, the thing is, I think if you are stuck in a waiting list, you don't care if it's a trust somewhere else, if it's a private sector who's doing it, as long as you get seen.
Yeah.
I don't think people are ideological about, it's the NHS, therefore it must be publicly funded and it must be my local hospital. They just want, as long as they're not being asked to travel across the other length and breadth of the country, I think anything that brings down waiting lists, because remember, this again was another one of Rishi Sunak's big promises. He would bring down waiting lists, and he's failed to do it thus far. So they're running out of time now before the next election if they're going to manage it.
What I don't get with this, and I've never understood with our system, is that people queuing to see Mr. Smith for an operation on an 18-month, 2-year waiting list. So, well, instead they're going to go private and be seen much quicker, but still probably be seen by Mr. Smith.
Yes, it's true. NHS doctors can take on these private contracts.
Yeah.
Yeah, and often...
So that sounds... It's so strange.
And given the way that doctors are trained in this country, which are heavily subsidised by the state, sometimes doctors get trained on the state and then immediately, or almost immediately, go into the private sector. So reform of that system has to be taken care of. I don't know the precise, incentives and stuff to know why some doctors, I mean, it must be paid more, but why do we allow it?
They should be stopped, shouldn't they? Oh, and there's another issue on the tick box of how to win the next general election, isn't it? Education.
Yes. So this is a really interesting story, I think. So this is Dame Sarah Khan, who's the social cohesion advisor, saying basically schools shouldn't be frightened of discussing the war in Gaza. Now, understandably, I think a lot of teachers are a little bit squeamish about it and they don't want to be seen to be taking a side. However, I think it's important that the kids get some sort of informed education on the issue.
Well, yeah, I would sort of agree, but if teachers say we're not talking about it because we feel ill-equipped, I'd rather they didn't talk about it because they're ill-equipped rather than bodge it.
That's true, and it's not as if the government is going to give them some kind of guide to how to talk about it, because even that inherently will be political.
It's such a toxic debate as well. If you even say it in slightly the wrong way, you're going to have demonstrations outside the school. We've seen that in East London.
Yeah, and they talk about, obviously, the teacher at Bartley Grammar School who was forced into hiding after accusations of blasphemy. It's interesting as well, they quote a couple of teachers in the story, but they're anonymous. The teachers won't put their names to it.
This is the problem.
They're frightened to, as they would say, take a stance either way because of the backlash that they would get as a result.
I honestly don't blame them.
No, I
don't blame them either.
It would be. I mean, it would be very healthy to be able to discuss it, and but you've got to do it in such a balance where I do not blame teachers for going, stay out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder if the thing to teach to kids is actually about how to have civil debate.
Yeah.
How to have an open mind about
so missing
the other
those, Cindy,
side.
isn't it?
Not just on this, exactly. So just to understand that if someone disagrees with you, they're not necessarily a bad person, and knowing how to have that kind of debate in schools maybe would help children be more equipped to understand
and
the
rather
situation.
that than social media, getting it all from social media, which is
yes,
You're
it's
getting
important.
bombarded with one side or the other.
Yeah, it's so important.
I've never quite understood. I remember when my niece and nephew were secondary school age, they just said, well, why aren't we taught about how to get a mortgage?
Yeah.
Or taught, all this sort of...
Yeah.
Do we need to change the syllabus so it is more life lessons than just academia?
Yeah, when I was in school, I was taught how to cook. Did you guys have that?
Yeah, I had that, yeah.
That was quite helpful, I think, especially, when we're talking about this obesity drive. But I don't know, I don't think I would have liked a mortgage lesson. I think I would have found that really
boring, to be
boring.
fair. It would have been boring. We had a little school bank. We were allowed to set up our little school bank, and it's linked to the tuck shop, and you learn how to manage money that way.
That's quite a good idea.
Yeah.
Wasn't
Did
very
you
good
guys
at
have flower babies? Well, this is maybe a girls' school thing. Well, I went to a girls' school and we had a flower baby where every girl had to take a patch of flour around for the whole week to show you how difficult and annoying it would be to have a baby.
Oh my God!
Oh, really?
Didn't get that. No, wow.
It's not a bad idea, that, actually.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah,
Don't get
you would be
pregnant.
shocked at how many flour pouches break.
Yeah. That's quite an interesting idea, actually.
You weren't allowed to leave it in your locker.
No. Oh, well, there you go. Cindy, Kevin, thank you. We'll see you a little bit later on. In the meantime, let's get a check on the weather for you right across the UK with Craig.